Precisamos de muitos inovadores na área da educação. Um ótimo ponto de partida para o nosso próximo orador. E como este momento não se faz sem vocês, nesta sessão terão a oportunidade de colocar as vossas questões. Passo então a explicar. Com o QR Code que têm à vossa frente nas cadeiras, podem digitalizá-lo e, à medida que o nosso orador for falando, podem começar a colocar as vossas questões que serão respondidas no final. Então, o nosso próximo convidado é um cientista de computação e um técnico educacional. É conhecido pelo seu projeto Hole in the Wall e pelo conceito School in a Cloud. E hoje vem-nos mostrar a sua visão sobre o futuro da educação, desafiando as abordagens tradicionais. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Professor Sugata Mitra.
Good morning. It's very nice not to be on Zoom. This is the second time I'm speaking in Lisbon, and I must tell you that I really enjoy speaking in your country because the audience responds, as you do now. Well, I'm going to, what I'm planning to do in the next 20 minutes or so, I hope, is to tell you a design, to explain a design of what the new kind of schooling might be like. You know, people talk about what's wrong with the old kind of schooling, and I will do that as well for a few minutes. But we kind of stop over there and we say, this is what's wrong, this is what's wrong. But what should we do next? I think we're just about getting there. And there are people who are speaking after me who will take that up even further. So tomorrow's education, what can it look like? Well, firstly, what's wrong with what we have today? What's wrong with today's education? Well, you know, in a nutshell, I think this is what it is, that there was a time, just about maybe 100 years back, when it was good to think of a world where everybody was similar. Because, you know, then you can predict what you can use them for, you can predict what they might say or do, how they will say or do these things, and so on. Why was that important? Because for doing predictable things again and again, we did not have machines. About 100 years back, or maybe 150, 200 years ago, we did not have machines to do those things, so we needed to have people who would do the same things over and over again. So, let's say you have a person doing a piece of clerical work, you know, copying something down from one ledger into another ledger. Reads this, copies, reads this, copies. And let's say that it's a man, and he is in New Zealand. And one day, there is a shortage for that kind of person in Canada. So you ship this fellow, you say, go off to Canada now, take this boat and go to Canada. You land up in Canada. Well, the job in Canada has to be exactly the same as the job in New Zealand, and it has to be done in exactly the same way. We needed a system which would produce identical people. We don't need that now, right? It's hopelessly out of date. We want people to be different from each other, so that when a new eventuality arises, you can look at your cohort, your group, and say, hey, she can do that. Sorry. The pandemic happened, and during the pandemic, for better or worse, the system crashed. It just stopped. And I was held up, I was stuck during the pandemic for almost 2 years in Calcutta in India. And I was watching to see what would the teachers do. Well, of course, you know what they did. Everybody did the same thing. They all turned to the internet. You know, my work has been with children and the internet, as I'll tell you in a moment, but after all those years, people suddenly said, oh, that guy, you know, he used to say you can use the internet, so let's use the internet. And what they did was they started creating classrooms, okay, on the little screen at home. Everybody join in. And I would take a walk around where I live in Calcutta, and from houses I would hear the voices of teachers coming over the computer saying, pay attention, you know, that kind of thing. I joined in a few of these sessions and discovered very quickly that the children were having a lot of fun because they had figured out how not to learn using this method. One child in particular was amazing. He could do something with his computer so that on his teacher's computer, who was doing Zoom or whatever it is, just over his name there would be a sign which says, reconnecting, ... And the teacher would say, oh, he's gone offline or whatever. And this fellow sort of does his thing and then okay, so they were doing all of this. It didn't work because, you know, the education world said, this is not education. What is this fellow? Instead of listening to the history of the Roman Empire or whatever was being taught, he was figuring out how to make his computer say reconnecting ... That's not wrong. After the pandemic, I was back in England, and the debate was, we can now go back to normal. As though normal is something that's over there behind you somewhere. So when all the bad stuff is over, you can go back to normal. So I said, why do we have to go back? Anywhere. Who says that normal's over there? 3 years ago, or 20 years ago, or 150 years ago? You know, why can't normal be ahead? Which brings me to our topic today. So tomorrow's education, is it back to normal? Or could it be something else? What could be an education that's kind of suitable for the times we are in? Example, times we are in, what does that mean? Just imagine, okay, if you're a parent of, let's say, a 6-year-old. By the time that child is 36, she may be living on Mars. What's the education system that will cater to this? And you know, and what I just said is not absurd. I'm sure you now agree that I can actually say with a straight face that at the age of 36, this 6-year-old might be living on Mars. I turned to two people to look for a new model of what works and what doesn't work. John Hattie, the Australian professor, and Stephen Heppel. Okay, first Hattie's work. What works? Well, according to him, the topmost, his work is amazing, okay, but I won't go into the whole thing. But the most powerful influences, collective teacher efficiency. Meaning, what does that mean? It simply means that if your teachers believe that you're a good guy, then the chances that you'll become a good guy are higher. It's as simple as that, okay? Collective teacher efficacy. Self-reported grades. How good are you at math? As good as you think you are, usually. If you really think to yourself, how good am I at math? You get the right score. And finally, class discussion. I mean, he says to me, I'm pretty good at math, and I say, David, no, you're not. And then we have a bit of a discussion, and finally we come to a score. What are the worst, the least, the most negative? Boredom. Every student knows about that, right? If you're not interested, you don't learn. Way back, many, many years ago, I had a great opportunity to meet the late Arthur C. Clarke, if you remember, the science fiction writer. He had read about my experiment called the hole in the wall, which I'll talk about in a moment, but he called me to Colombo, said, I want to meet this guy, and we had a chat. And he said something really nice. Let me see if this plays.
Help as much as possible, and they can undoubtedly help people, because the children very quickly learn to navigate the web and find things which interest them. And when you've got interest, then you have education.
When you've got interest, you have education. It's as simple as that. Then I turned to Stephen Heppel's work. Heppel's work was very, very, very earthy, very straightforward. He said, well, interested or not interested, or, teacher or no teacher, technology or no technology, what kind of a room should you be in? What kind of a space should you be in? What's the right temperature? What's the right light levels? What should be what's the effect of the color of the classroom? Should it be white or should it be red walls or what? He studied all of those amazing pieces of work and showed how tiny little problems in something like, for example, the amount of carbon dioxide in a room can affect what happens. I love his work. I added a few more things to it, I added, because I live part of my life in the tropics every year, humidity. What do you make the floors out of? What kind of wiring do you have so that, rats and things don't get at it? That kind of thing. Those are important factors too. So if you take Hattie's factors and Heppel's factors, put them all both together, you get an idea of what should happen. As far as my work is concerned, it started way back and it landed itself in a system called self-organized learning environments, which simply means that if you really want to learn something, Arthur C. Clarke, if you are interested, if you want to learn something, if the environment is right, if I as a teacher believe that you can learn it, then you will. So a bit of history, where did that come from? Well, the first of the experiments, the hole in the wall, I know that it was 25 years ago. There are people in this audience who weren't even born then. It was a very simple experiment. Take a computer, put it in the street, into a wall like a bank ATM, put the internet on it, and let children play with it. Today, that's not a big deal. Back in 1999, it was a very big deal because, people didn't have computers, they'd never seen one before, and so on. So I did that experiment in 1999, and there's this little piece of film taken by a friend of mine which kind of showed what happened on that very first instant. Little boy on the right is the teacher. To his left, his student. She's a bit short. And he was teaching her to browse in English. So, all hell broke loose. Who taught them? And nobody did. Nobody that I know of. How did they pick up enough English to do all this? I don't know, but in 7 days later they were downloading games and playing them. We all know this happens. You give a 5-year-old a mobile phone, and in a week's time he's doing things which you wonder how anybody could understand how to do. But back then nobody knew this. I called it self-organized learning. And it happens in groups, okay, very important. You need curiosity, you need groups, you need public visibility. It's not those things that happen at the back of the cave somewhere, alone, by yourself. No, that's not how self-organized learning happens. I brought that method over from India into the United Kingdom, into the schools of a little city called Gateshead, where I now live. And it worked even better than India, because obviously the children, their language was English, so they had no problems reading the screens. All you needed to do was ask them a big question. What's a big question? Well, it differs from age group to age group, okay? Very interesting what big questions are at different ages. Let's take a big question, my favorite big question by a 5-year-old. Are we real? Okay. Go a little bit further up to the 9-year-old. Can fish cry? Okay, go a little bit further up to the 13-year-old. Why do I have to go to school? Go a little bit further up, the 18-year-old. What's the quickest way to become a YouTube millionaire? Big questions of our time. I still like the 5-year-olds. Are we real? Souls can be, really chaotic. Hong Kong. So, enormous amount of noise and everything. Souls started spreading. They spread, of all places, out of Melbourne, Australia. I got invited in 2010 to this conference called Big Ideas, or something, a big day out. There were 3,000 school principals. I talked about my experiments there and said, this is how it works. And guess what? Out of 3,000 principals, 2 picked it up. Don't ask me what the other 2,998 did. Presumably I couldn't convince them, but 2 did. And they took it all over, from Victoria to up towards Sydney, then towards Darwin. In the meanwhile, out of Gateshead, the method was spreading into England, moved into Latin America, of all places, Argentina, and then into Brazil, up finally into the United States. Teachers started asking really difficult questions, and they kept writing to me and said, they answered it. They said, like this, Cézanne's watercolors for 10-year-olds. What's special about Cézanne's watercolors?
It's got to do with Cézanne. In most of his paintings, he made them 3-dimensional. So that was achieved by the front being lighter than the back of the painting. So that showed 3-dimensional.
And so on. Okay, let's come to design. So this is the story, okay? The hole in the wall, self-organized learning environments, the pandemic. Shall we go back to normal? What's normal anyway? Do we need identical people? Looks like we don't. We need collective teacher efficacy. We need the right environment. We need the internet. So what's the definition of education? I made this one. The purpose of education is to enable people to live happy, healthy, and useful lives. I don't think you would disagree. Happy, healthy, useful. Straightforward, right? What's happy? Well, I tried looking for a definition. Nobody seems to know actually what it means. I mean, we all know what happiness is, but we don't know what it is, if you see what I mean. Healthy? Oh yes, a blood pressure of 130 by 75, blood sugar of below 100, and after eating your breakfast it mustn't cross 110. You know that's not healthy. People who don't have those numbers can be very healthy, and people who have those numbers can be very unhealthy. We don't know what healthy means. Useful, yes, we know what useful means. Useful means you should be able to work out the Young's modulus of a steel rod. Right? Then you're useful. Where? On Mars? No, come on, you're talking about here. So here's the curriculum then. Alive, happy, healthy, useful. I added alive. You should know how to cross the road so that you don't get hit by a car. Happy, healthy, useful, to whatever extent we teachers can figure out the meaning of those words. I made a little diagram. By the way, I'm rushing through this because all this is actually there on the internet. I'll give you the reference in a moment. So if you put living, happiness, health, and usefulness, you can construct a curriculum out of that. Then how do you make that curriculum happen? What's the method? Well, I found 4 things there actually. The souls, my stuff, self-organized learning environments, the big question, a few big computers, lots of children by themselves. Fab Lab, Neil Gershenfeld of MIT's creation of a laboratory for everything, where you can take apart anything and put together anything. You could ask yourself a question, can I take a chicken's egg and make it hatch into a rabbit? Well, the Fab Lab should let you do that. It already exists, more or less, and is getting there. Finally, then of course play. We all know about play. And talk. Talk, of course, is what we've been doing for centuries. How do we assess? Well, we need to redefine the certificate. What does the certificate tell you? It tells you, Bachelor of Science. Bachelor of Science, what does that mean? Bachelor in English means somebody who is not married. So Bachelor of Science, well, it doesn't say anything about if you're happy, if you're healthy, or if you're useful. We've got to put those factors into the certificate. Okay? Happiness, health, usefulness, to whatever extent the institution can measure. Then that certificate would be useful. And finally, at home, you need a dedicated space. Now it's no longer the desk, okay? You need a dedicated space, a big screen, all of this stuff here, Bluetooth, earbuds, etc., etc. You work all that out. But it's no longer a little table in a corner and Johnny, go and study. That's got to change. Well, that's about what I had. That was the message. And here's the reference. These are open access papers, Children and the Internet. That's got all of what I spoke about in a fair bit of detail. And another one, the more recent one, 2022, it's time we put the Internet as a subject. If you can have chemical engineering as a subject in universities, why isn't there a subject called the Internet in schools? I'll tell you why. You won't find a teacher. You won't find a textbook because it changes all the time. And you can't examine for it without actually asking the examinee to use the Internet. So it hasn't come into the subject. I asked this question once in British bureaucratic meeting, the answer was, well, they're picking this all up anyway on their own, so why bother? Okay. I think we need to put it back there. So that's it. I hope that made some sense. Thank you.